video we'll be reviewing IRS Form 8889, Health Savings Accounts, also known as HSAs. This is a one-page tax form. Before we go through the form itself, we are going to go over a couple of administrative items with regards to this tax form. The purpose of this form is to 1. Report HSA contributions. Those include contributions made on your behalf and employer contributions. 2. Calculate your HSA deduction. 3. Report distributions from HSAs. And 4. Determine amounts that you must include in income and any additional tax that you may owe if you fail to be an eligible individual. You must file Form 8889 if any of the following applies to you. 1. You or someone on your behalf, to include your employer, made contributions to your HSA during the tax year. 2. You received HSA distributions during the tax year. 3. You must include certain amounts in income because you failed to be an eligible individual during the testing period. And 4, you acquired an interest in an HSA because of the death of the account beneficiary. What is an eligible individual? To be eligible for contributions into your HSA account, you must be covered under a high deductible health plan, or HDHP, and have no other health coverage except certain disregarded coverage. If you are an eligible individual, anyone can contribute to your HSA. However, you cannot be enrolled in Medicare or be another person's dependent. An individual does not fail to be treated as an eligible individual for any period merely because that individual receives hospital care or medical services under any law administered by the Secretary of Veterans Affairs for a service-connected disability. However, TRICARE beneficiaries cannot contribute to an HSA. Qualified medical expenses for HSA purposes are unreimbursed medical expenses that could otherwise be deducted on Schedule A of your 1040. For more information, see the instructions for Schedule A and IRS Publication 502, Medical and Dental Expenses. There are several parts to this tax form. There's Part 1, HSA contributions and deductions, then Part 2, HSA distributions. In Part 1, you will use this section to figure your HSA deduction as well as any excess contributions made by you or an employer on your behalf. If you have self-only coverage, your maximum contribution for tax year 2022 is $3,650. If you have family coverage, your maximum is $7,300. If you are age 55 or older at the end of the tax year, you may make an additional contribution of $1,000. This maximum contribution is reduced by any employer contributions to your HSA, any contributions made to an Archer MSA, and any qualified HSA funding distributions. If both you and your spouse have HSAs, complete lines 1 through 11 as instructed. However, if you and your spouse filing jointly are both eligible individuals and either of you has an HDHP with family coverage, you are both treated as having only the family coverage plan. Disregard any plans with self-only coverage. You must complete a separate Form 8889 for each spouse. and you will combine the amounts on line 13 of both forms. Enter this amount on Schedule 1, line 13. Be sure to attach both forms to your paper tax return. In line 1, if you were covered or considered covered by a self-only HDHP and a family HDHP at different times, check the box that was in effect for the longer period. If you're covered by both types of plans, a self-only and a family HDHP at the same time, you're treated as if you had family coverage during that period. On line 2, include only those amounts that either you or others on your behalf contributed to your HSA for the tax year. Also include amounts contributed for the tax year that were made in the following tax year by the unextended deadline. For example, for the 2022 income tax return, any amounts that are deposited by April 18th, 2023, the deadline for the 2022 tax year, would be included in line 2. In line 3, if you were under the age of 55 at the end of the year and on the first day of every month during the tax year, you were considered an eligible individual with the same coverage, enter either $3,650 for self-only coverage or $7,300 for family coverage. Even if you have self-only coverage, if you or your spouse had family coverage, you will use the family coverage number. There are additional rules and guidelines in the form instructions. If you have questions on whether you were covered during a particular month, you should refer to the instructions. For line 4, you will enter the amount that you and your employer contributed to Archer MSAs from Form 8853. If you do not have Archer MSAs, this number will remain 0. For line 5, subtract line 4 from line 3. If this number is 0 or less, enter 0. In line 6, enter the amount from line 5. But if you and your spouse have separate HSAs and had family coverage, then you should refer to the instructions. In line 7, if you were age 55 or older at the end of the tax year, married, and you and your spouse had family coverage, enter your additional contribution amount. You can find this on the additional contribution amount worksheet. In line 8, you will add lines 6 and 7. In line 9, you will include employer contributions. This includes payroll contributions through a cafeteria plan. This includes any amount for the previous tax year that was reported in box 12 of your Form W-2 with code W. In line 10, you will enter any qualified HSA funding distribution. This would be a distribution from a traditional IRA or Roth IRA to your HSA in a direct trustee-to-trustee transfer. The qualified HSA funding distribution is not included in your income, it is not deductible, and it reduces the amount that can be contributed to your HSA by you and from other sources. This cannot be made from an ongoing SEP or simple IRA. In line 11, you will add lines 9 and 10. In line 12, you will subtract line 11 from line 8. If this number is 0 or less, enter 0. And line 13, enter the smaller of line 2 or line 12, both here and on Schedule 1, Part 2, line 13. If line 2 is greater than line 13, you may have to pay an additional tax for excess contributions that you make. There are conditions in which you can withdraw some or all excess contributions without tax consequence. For more detail, refer to the form instructions. Part 2, HSA distributions. There are a couple of notes. 1, if you did not receive a distribution during the tax year, you probably do not have to fill out Part 2. If you and your spouse each have separate HSAs, then you will need to complete a separate Part 2 for each spouse. Starting with line 14, you will enter the total distributions that you received during the tax year from all HSAs. In line 14B, you'll include distributions that were included on line 14A rolled over to another HSA. Also include any excess contributions that were included on line 14A but withdrawn by the due date of your tax return. Line 14C, subtract line 14B from line 14A. Line 15 should contain your qualified medical expenses paid using HSA distributions. You should see the form instructions for additional detail. Line 16 represents your taxable HSA distributions. You will subtract line 15 from line 14C. If this number is 0 or less, enter 0. Also, include this amount in the total on Schedule 1, Part 1, line 8F. For line 17A, if any distributions meet the exceptions to the 20% additional tax, then you should check the box. Otherwise, you will enter 20% of the distributions that were included on line 16, subject to the additional 20% tax. You will also include this amount in the total on Schedule 2, Part 2, line 17C. In Part 3, you will have to see the instructions before completing Part 3. If you're filing jointly and you and your spouse each have separate HSAs, you should complete a separate Part 3 for each spouse. Line 18 is the last month rule. Line 19 is your qualified HSA funding distribution. Line 20 is the total income, where you add lines 18 and 19. Include this amount on Schedule 1, Part 1, line 8F. 21 is your additional tax, which you arrive at by multiplying line 20 by 10%. You will include this amount on Schedule 2, Part 2, line 17D. That concludes our review of IRS Form 8889, Health Savings Accounts. We've written a complete step-by-step guide, which you can find on our website. Go to teachmepersonalfinance.com, type in IRS Form 8889 in the search bar, and you should see our article. If you like this video, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you have questions, please feel free to post them in the comment section. Thank you very much.